I don't know.
Talking about,
I've told you about Harry and I at Christmas time,
what was that?
where they'd always hide the presents in the dining room and living room, and he would take me into the dining room, and they had a tall cupboard thing, and they'd put stuff up on top there, and he'd put me up on his shoulders and have me look at the packages and tell me what was there. This was good, Mr. Two-Shoe Harry.
You know who's like that is Katie.
Really?
She'll dig through everything, try to find her presents.
We went upstairs. Mother and Daddy had bought a bushel of oranges, a bushel of apples, and I don't know, probably half a bushel of nuts in here, and I just had a field day. They didn't know it until Christmas time came, when it was time to put them out and fill the stockings, you know, and they had all those orange peelings on the floor upstairs. When it got too awfully cold, we'd sleep downstairs in the kitchen on the daybed with Grandma on. So they didn't go upstairs to check them. Now you'd think that fruit would be frozen though, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
When it was that cold. Of course, some heat, I suppose, is bound to drift up there, but when you didn't open the doors and what, even when Daddy'd go out and cut down a cedar tree for Christmas, you know, we'd put it in the far front room, in front of the windows, and have one of those stands where you could put some water in it. And we had icicles, but, you know, it wasn't till we were pretty good size, but we had lights on it. But we wouldn't get to go in there and enjoy it because it was too cold.
Yeah.
Till it was almost time for Christmas for them to heat up the furnace in the basement, you know. And then we'd get to enjoy it. And they'd usually have heat in there till after New Year's, and then we could go in there. But that big old square thing in between the living room and the dining room, that's where all the heat came up from the furnace down below, and then you'd open up the registers in the floor upstairs, and then they'd come on upstairs, and then you could have heat upstairs.
A special event, huh?
It really made a big difference when you're used to sleeping up there with ice on the windows.
Yeah, Dad said he woke up a lot of times with frost all around on the blankets where he'd been breathing.
Cold, yeah, cold. But you just, you know, as I say, you were used to it. So that's just what you expected. And being young, we didn't think as much about it as if you were old. As I look back on it now, I feel sorry for Grandma and Grandpa than I did for us, but they'd done that all their lives. I just wonder if they slept downstairs before Mother and Daddy came back home to live with them. Of course, you know, Mother and Daddy lived down at Jeffersonville when he worked on the railroad.
Yeah, what happened with that?
Well, Mother was pregnant. She was a homebody, you know. Every time they come up and visit, she'd cry when they left. And she loved those people down there at Jeffersonville. They had a lot of friends. It wasn't like she was, you know, without anybody down there. They had a lot of friends. And even after they moved back home, you know, they'd go back down there and visit on the weekends and see all of them and whatever. They were all just crazy about Harry because he was the only little one. Wilma and Earl didn't have any children, and Guy and Hazel didn't have any children. And, you know, you come around with a little one, why they just were oohing and awing and tickled to death. I forget the other people's names. Kehoe's that Mother always talked about. They had the grocery store, I think, close to where they lived.
Was that kind of a big deal to work for the railroad?
Well, it paid, you know, back then. And then, of course, I don't know why Daddy quit working for the railroad, other than if the Depression laid him off, because I came along in the height of the Depression, and Daddy didn't have a job, and he always talked about, he went to Mr. Well, he had the refinery. I can't think of his name right this minute. I said it the other day. I was telling Billy Bob about it. And he went to him and he said, you know, I've just got to have a job. I've got a little boy and I've got, my wife's pregnant, going to have a baby. And I've just got to have some work. And he gave Daddy a job. And he, as I say, he had the oil refinery. And that's one way that Daddy got into having filling stations, was working for him. So he just, one time he had the pure oil and another time it was something else. But he had the Good Gulf there at 2nd and Jackson for years and years. But everybody congregated at the Good Gulf filling station. Everybody that came into town. When Sunshine's family moved to Indiana from Kentucky, that's how we met Sunshine and all of them. His dad started going down to see Daddy down at the filling station. But I don't know why, but they would all come to see Daddy down there. And well, he was good to them. He'd let them run a tab when they didn't have any money, and I think for the most part he got his money back. One time when Betsy was going to Jefferson School, no, McKinley School, Daddy would go pick her up ever so often. And I don't know why I was with him that one day, but he went a little early. And when he pulled up there to the school, he said, "I'll be back in a minute." I said, "Where are you going?" He said, "Well, I want to see a guy in here." And I said, "Okay." So I sat out there in the car, and when he came back, why, I said, "Who'd you see, Daddy?" And he said, "Well," he said, "I loaned a guy a little money in there," and he said, "I thought this might be a good time to see if he'd like to pay me back." I don't remember who it was now, and I don't know whether he worked as custodian in there or what, but I think Daddy got his money when he went in there.
Oh, I'll be
But
darned.
he was always loaning somebody money. Oh, there's the rain. Good. Because we turned the sprinkler on the front yard. All the rain we had with all the flood and everything.
All drained off, didn't it?
Well, we lived out here on Sand Hill. It just goes through like down in Florida. That doesn't last. But I'm really glad to see this. I'm going to have to turn the sprinkler on. Well, what else you want to know?
The fish stand.
Hard work and had a ball. It was hard work. You'd think you'd feed clean from 500 to 750 pounds of fish in just a few days.
What kind of fish?
Herring. You get them out of St. Ignace up in Michigan, and they come in fresh on the train. They're boxed in wood crates and iced down. They were sent in whole. So when you unpacked them, out back there, they'd unpack them out back and get the ice off of them. It was concrete back there, and bring them in, and we'd had that big long table, and Dad'd just dump a bunch of them on there, and one person would stand at head and tail, hand it over to the next person, they'd gut, take them on in there and bone them out. You just laid them back. That bone, that whole bone would just come right out. You'd run your fingernail under there, take that side out, and then just lift that whole skeleton out, and out it came. But we'd spend, almost one whole day just getting started. But as soon as you had enough fixed, they didn't wash them out. I think maybe Daddy, after you gutted them, you washed them, run some water on them. There was a sink in there where they fried. And then they'd wash them off in there, and then they'd stand there and bone them. And I would stand over there by the, had that huge big metal thing that they fried in, about that deep. And then Daddy would count. He'd only do so many fryings in that bunch of lard. And then he would pour that off, and he'd have buckets down there that the lard came in, and after he'd empty one, he'd save it. And then he'd pour that off, save the top of the best of the grease off, and then he'd have another bucket to clean the leavings out in, because that breading and so forth in your corn meal would settle to the bottom. And if you didn't pour off ever so often, that'd start to burn and get dark in there, and that'd give your fish a bad flavor. So he'd pour that off in one, then he'd get the leavings off in another can, and then put it back on, pour the good stuff back in, and then add to it each time. Then you'd do maybe 2 or 3, depending on how many leavings you had in there, 2 or 3 fryings again. But always out of the first frying, Daddy always had to have he'd take one of the tails. Sometimes if the fish was long, You just whack off a piece like this, and you'd call that end the tail end, and the big end would fill up bun, you know. Daddy always had to have one of the tails out of the first fry. See, it was all new grease.
Yeah.
Everything was just fresh and good. Fish had just come in.
He just ate the tails, though, because he wanted to sell the...
Yeah, the big one. Well, it was just as good.
Yeah.
It was nice and crispy, you know.
No, it was a good sandwich.
25 cents a sandwich, 2 for 35.
2 for 35.
2 for 35. Yep. Freddie Fisher'd come over across the street from the bakery, carried one of those great big trays, fresh baked buns. Come in there and they'd still be warm. Sit down, set that tray of buns down there, take it out front where we sold them, and Daddy'd say, "Come on, Freddie." Give Freddie out of that first batch too, you know. And Edith, she'd make beef and noodles there in the back, and sour cream cake, and Grandma Wagner stood there and scaled and gutted just the same as everybody. She was about 80 when she did that. Stood there just as long as anybody. She just had the best time. She just enjoyed every minute of that. She just looked forward to it. Wouldn't miss out for anything. Unfortunately, I pulled that off a bad trick on her. I don't know why. Well, I think all the fish, everything was clean. We were just selling. And it was Halloween. And I said, I'm going to play a trick on Grandma. So I called and I said, "Mrs. Wagner, this is Miss Vogel. And I just saw some kids take the clothes off your clothesline out there in the back and run down the alley with them." Grandma said, "Oh, thank you," and boom, she hung up before I had a chance to say anything, you know. And I said, "Oh my goodness," I said, "I've really done something terrible." I told her, I said, "I better go over there." I said, "Grandma will be up and down that alley hunting those kids." I went tearing over there. Of course, it was just a half block there and a half block there to get there. Sure enough, she was out in the backyard looking for those kids. I said, "Oh, Grandma, I'm afraid to tell you this, but I did it as a trick." Maybe it was April. It was April Fool, not Halloween. It was April Fool, and she was mad enough at me. She could have whipped me that time. Neither she nor Grandpa ever laid a hand on either one of us. That's why we're so spoiled, I guess. But she was so mad at me. She said, "I just run out there." She said, "I could have had a heart attack." And I said, "I know it. That's what upset me." Oh. I was going over to the fish stand, and my dog got out and followed me and come across Jackson Street. And I yelled at Scorchy, and a car came and ran over the top of it. It never hit him. He like squatted down or something, and the car just passed over him. And you know that dog was never right after that.
Oh, I'll be darned.
Never was right. Doc Tucker said that it bothered his heart. He gave me some heart pills to give him, but he was never mean until that happened. And that's when he started turning on people. But the car never struck him. He didn't have a mark on him. I ran out in the street and got him after the car went by and took him home. But he followed me out and went across Jackson Street. But he was a good dog up until then. And then after that, that car going over him did something to him mentally or something, you know.
What about Doc, the hunting dog?
Oh, that was my fault, you know. He got killed.
I know.
Oh, that was another sad day. That was a bad time. I tell you, I was pregnant. I was cleaning in the living room.
Pregnant with who?
Connie. And I was cleaning in the living room. And I've still got the bottom part of Grandma's lamp that Daddy had wired for electricity, an old oil lamp. And I stood up on Uncle Darrell's table to clean woodwork or something in there. I don't know, we might have been getting ready to have a shower for Nancy or somebody, Jean Butler and I. And anyway, I was too big to be up there anyway. I was pregnant, and I knocked the top off of that lamp, and that like to broke my heart. And of course, I never was able to get a lampshade to put on there, or another globe to put on there. Then I had Martha May brought the kids from the girls' club, and I told them they could have the Easter egg hunt out there. And they went out into the chicken yard there, and Doc got loose, and I couldn't catch him. And he got kind of wild because all the kids around, you know, and took off and ran for the schoolhouse. And I was big as a barn. There was no way I could catch him. And I kept yelling at him, and by the time he got down there by Barry's, he went headed across the road, and the car got him. And I thought, oh my Lord, I've got to call my daddy and tell him. I tell you, one of the hardest things I ever did.
Yeah.
And you know, he said, that's all right, honey. Couldn't be helped.
Yeah, Dad had a wreck one time.
Yeah.
He was the same way with that.
Yeah. Was anybody hurt? No. Well, okay. We'll talk about it in the morning.
Go to bed. We'll talk about it.
Yeah. We'll talk about it in the morning.
Take your girlfriend home.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, Daddy never went off like we do. He never did.
Must have been from the Wagner side, huh?
No, he was a Carmichael. But he just didn't. But I'll tell you, if he ever said, sit down, Janine, I want to talk to you, I'd start crying. Because I knew I'd done something wrong. And he wasn't that bad about it. He'd just go over things and tell me, you know, you shouldn't have done that.
Yeah.
One of the big things with Daddy was I'd say, Daddy, I need $1, or I need 2.5, or I need so much, you know. I have to go get so-and-so, and it costs so much. And he'd say, okay, here you are. And as soon as I come back, where's the change? It was always, where's the change? And you know, it didn't make that much difference to him.
No.
Or he wouldn't have given me the money. But that was just one of his things. And you were honest. Where's the change? You know, you knew what you had spent, and you knew what was supposed to be coming back. So it was good training. You know, he wasn't doing it to be mean. It was just, but I know when I was in school, if be out for recess and I'd see Daddy coming down the hill, I knew he'd brought me something from the filling station.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, sometimes he'd come down and bring me a bar of candy from the filling station. Back then, bar of candy was a pretty good treat. You didn't have them that often. Either that, or in the summertime, if he come home, he'd bring Nancy out to play with me. And I didn't have that many playmates, so boy, I was always tickled to see somebody. But Daddy was always good about family. Boy, he kept them all together.
He did.
Yep, he was. After every one of them, he knew what every one of them was doing, who all their kids were, and who they were married to, and you know, he wasn't going to let anybody not be still in the family. They all had to get together. So that was good. That was good.
Tell me about the pie baking. Didn't she have a business for a while?
Yes, Mother baked pie.